Well, welcome to the Sherwood Oaks podcast. My name is Sean, and all summer long, in addition to the weekly sermon and minute message, we are going to be bringing you interviews with people from within our church family and to just give them an opportunity to tell their faith story. One of our values as a church is that we tell life-changing faith stories, stories that show us what it looks like to follow Jesus in everyday life, maybe even encourage us to put our own faith into action. And today, in our fourth episode, I am really excited to be joined by someone who is very special to me. Someone who I not only look up to because of their faith, but also because she happens to be my mother-in-law. Lyne Brown, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me to do this.
Yeah. So why don't you start just by sharing a little bit about you so that our audience can get to know you some.
Okay. Well, I grew up on a farm in a small county, farming community about 60 miles from here, and raised our girls there. I guess I should talk about the childhood before I talk about raising my daughters. Grew up in a Christian home, going to a Christian church in, I'll just say I'm from Sullivan County,
Yeah.
Indiana.
Yeah.
And it was a great time. Had a lot of influence from parents and grandparents and great Sunday school teachers and a great church family. And you've been at that church family. You know how good it is.
Yeah, we were part of that. Our first year and a half was at Sullivan First Christian Church, and
Yes.
they were wonderful.
Yeah, good
wonderful
people. Yeah, a lot of, I couldn't name all the people who influenced my lives there, but I was really fortunate to have a lot of grandparents still living as I grew up, and so I knew 4 grandparents and 5 great-grandparents.
Wow. Now, see, that is unusual
It
to
is
be able to
very
have
unusual.
that much family that is in your sphere of influence.
Yeah.
What a blessing.
And while they all had influence in my life, it was more from example and from the love that they gave to me than from the words they were necessarily telling me about Scripture and about Jesus. It was they were
caught it along the
Christians.
way.
Yeah, we just lived it.
Yeah. And growing up on a farm, I mean, you got to do all sorts of fun things.
Oh yeah, I could talk all day about the fun stuff we did on the farm.
One of the most mind-blowing things that I remember hearing early on in Amber and I's marriage is that you had a motorcycle. Like, I thought that was the coolest thing. My mother-in-law drove a motorcycle.
Not only that, but I wish I still had that motorcycle.
I mean, especially with gas what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Yeah, I grew up on mini bikes and then graduated to a motorcycle and then, learned mowing the yard young and then graduated to the pickup truck with the stick shift in the field and then to tractors. So,
And that's kind of all part of that rural Indiana, farm community. There's just also this deep sense of faith community.
I think so
in
too.
it as well. My grandma and grandpa Green, they live not too far from Sullivan, and it's the same thing. I remember going there and seeing the faith of my grandparents as they farmed and just as they stewarded the land that God had entrusted to them.
You got to have a lot of faith to put that crop out there and rely on all of nature to provide what's needed.
Yeah, there's probably a sermon in there.
Yeah, I'm sure
somewhere,
there is.
I would imagine. Now, early in your adult life, you grew up, strong family, great memories, strong faith and church community. But early in your adult life, tragedy struck your family.
It did.
Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, and my faith, I was baptized when I was 9. That was just sort of the thing you did. And I believed in Jesus, but my faith didn't become my own until I was a young adult, and I really started experiencing small groups and or just back then we just called them in-home Bible studies. But we had our kids, and we started going to church on Sunday nights because they had a youth group program, and the girls were little, and we had a couple of amazing preachers at Sullivan. I was just really blessed to be a part of that. And Ben Merrill, who some people will recognize that name, was there for 12 years, and he left whenever I was 9, and I was going to get baptized before the new guy came. And then John Lytle came. So he was a extraordinary man and singer-songwriter. So Sunday nights were fun, a lot of music. So I'm still touched a lot when I hear old hymns or songs so those are a part of me in those. And I've shared my story with other people who really relate to that as growing up as kids with all these songs and everything. But yes, so when I was 24 in 1984, so whoever wants to can do the math. Earlier than that, when I was about middle school, my mom started suffering from some depression, and I started noticing some changes in her, and it was getting harder, and it seemed just like she was getting worse. And so in the 80s, interest rates were 13 to 15%. And, you have to take out a lot of money to put out a crop and farm. And then in 1984, there was a drought that year. And Dad had taken on some extra farm ground a few years before that. And that was so that Gary and I could farm with he and my brother. And but that didn't last real long. So the year before, I think in 82 or 83, Gary went back to the coal mine. So in 84, we had all of these extra stressors going on, and of a drought, extra farm ground that's suffering, high interest rates. Yeah, it was crazy. A lot of stress going on. And that just compounded her depression. And so we were at... I can go into lots of detail and take a long time, but on July the 8th, the day after Amber's third birthday, we had celebrated on her birthday with my family and had a good day. But we were at Gary's mom Sunday after church on the 8th, and my dad called and said, "Your mom's not doing very well. Can you come down?" So we actually took, Gary was a little slow in getting there. He took us on the long route, past some farm ground.
Check the fields.
I don't know why. Later, I realized that had to be God just speaking to him to take his time. We were checking out the fields and stuff, because it normally would have taken us 20 minutes. It took us 45 probably to make that drive. The girls are with us in the back seat. We turned on the last road to go to my parents' house and noticed a van. Thought it was John Lytle and one of the elders. Thought, well, that's weird.
On a Sunday night.
When time for church to start. It was about 6 o'clock. And got to the house. There were a couple of more cars parked on the road, and there was one in the driveway. And I think Gary knew as soon as he saw John behind us. But I didn't, even though that scenario had actually played through my mind, because I was afraid that it would happen. And so I recognized the black sedan in the driveway with the trunk open, and that was our county coroner, who was a family friend. And I knew then what had happened, that Mother had taken her own life. And it's still hard for me to say committed suicide. I just, So she and Dad had struggled, and and it happened. And it was just devastating. I remember, it was almost 40 years ago, and I didn't write my book until 2018, and those details were so vivid still.
That's something that stays with you.
It does,
you don't get over that.
It's traumatic.
In an instant.
Yeah. What
did that do to your faith?
Well, at that time, I really think I was kind of on a mountaintop. That's what we used to call it. I don't know if you still call it that now, but like I said, I really came into my own faith. It became mine when I was in my early 20s, so not that much before this. I'm 24 at this point. And so my faith was really strong, and I didn't feel like it was shaken. I was shaken, but I still had strong faith. So it kind of got over the next, it was kind of got whittled down a little bit. Each little thing that took place, and we can talk about those as we go.
That's interesting how you said that. My faith wasn't shaken. I was shaken, but my faith wasn't shaken. Talk about that just a little bit.
Well,
'Cause that's I think where the rubber hits the road of faith. Where
yes.
wow, this event definitely was not something I was anticipating or wanting in my life, but having that solid faith to be able to fall
Right.
back on.
Yeah, and I think God had brought me along to that moment, help with the people in my life through the church, and just to help me build that faith. And you know, his timing is perfect. We don't see it as perfect, but I'd forgotten this till just now. I remember one time saying, I don't know why all of these things happened, but I know why they happened in the order that they happened, which was kind of interesting. And you know the story, and Mother could not have handled all of the things that happened, and then we would have blamed those things, or whatever would have happened.
So that unfortunately was not the end of tragedy for your family.
Yeah.
And so tell us what happened after that.
Well, so that was July of '84, and we had a lot of firsts to get through. 2 more girls with birthdays, one with becoming 1-year-old without Grandma Nan. And so having a memory loss here. We made it through. We had holidays, you know, and Mother's birthday came in September. So all of those firsts that you go through, we made it through those. We made it through the first of the next year, 1985, and you know, you kind of take a deep breath. Lacey had started kindergarten in the fall of '84, so you know, kind of trying to keep life as normal as possible for the kids, and then in the spring, winter, Dad was trying to get the loan for putting out the next crop. And he and my brother farmed, and Gary and I were out of it by this time. And because of interest rates, I think there was probably a big debt that was insurmountable. And the bank wouldn't loan him the money to put out the crop. And they had suffered everything from the drought. So in March of that year, he had to quit farming. And this had been a generational farm. Still had his dad and his brother were farming nearby. So they took over the farming of it, because fortunately the farm ground and my dad's house and the barns and everything were not affected by, they weren't part of the collateral. And so we still had the house, still had the barns, still had the whole pasture and all the fun stuff to do, but you know, I'm grown up, but I'm wanting my kids to experience this too. And we just lived a mile away. So made it through all of that. Then they couldn't farm, and we had the auction in March to sell all the farm equipment.
Cool. Man, I remember the day of my grandfather's auction. I was just a little boy, and that's a hard day.
It's very
kind
hard.
of like a final
It is,
moment.
yeah. It was very surreal. I think Gary was working, and the girls, I probably had a babysitter for them, or they were at Gary's mom's, but I went by myself and just kind of wandered around, and it was so weird. People walking off with stuff that they'd bought that had been part of our family and part of Dad's career and my brother's career, and it was just bizarre.
Very surreal.
And then the barns are left empty, and there's grain bins and all of that. Which my uncle and my brother utilized all of that to help with the farming. And we had the house. So the house was still a place that I could go and feel Mother's presence. You know, she's there, there's her pictures and her...
You have all these memories of that there.
All the special things that she's collected and done, and just, she was proud of her home, and so I could still go there. So that whole area, I don't think I can explain how much a part of me farming was, even though it was not my deal. I drove a tractor in the field, and rode my mini bike and motorcycle all over the place,
Yeah.
and had lots of freedom, and loved it. I loved growing up on the farm. I loved that farm, and just, yeah.
Kind of felt like the end of a chapter.
It did.
I'm sure.
Very much felt like an end of a chapter. So that was in March, and then April came and went, and then May came, and the end of the month was Memorial Day weekend, and we decided to go. We had a camper, so we were going to take the kids and go camping. We were going to get out of town, because living a mile away, kind of on a little knoll, you've seen that house. Everything I looked out, every window I looked out was painful. And so we went to northern Indiana, visited some friends, and went camping, spent some time with them, and just for the weekend. And about 5:30 in the morning on Memorial Day, somebody knocked on our camper door. And so Gary answered it, and he said, "You've got a phone call you need to come and take." And I said, "You need to go. I can't do this. I can't go." And
you're still reeling from
hear anything else. And so Gary came back, and he said, "Your dad's house is on fire." And so we're thinking, okay, do we need to rush home? We're 4 hours away. What good can we do? Dad had gone to Owensboro, Kentucky for the weekend because of the same reasons. He needs to get away. He and my brother are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives.
What's next?
Dad was 47 when this happened. That seemed a little older to me at the time than it does now. So, he had a big time to fill. So they're trying to figure that out. Anyway, he leaves town. So we get back to our friend's house before we start home, and I had a message from the coroner, who again was a family friend, that he needed me to call him. So I called, and that's a call you don't want to make. But he said, "Your dad is missing. We don't know where he's at. We know that he was supposed to have gone out of town, but the truck, he took his car. The truck is still in the garage, and I have to have your permission to go on the premises and look for his body." So I said, "Of course." And then we drove home 4 hours.
Without cell phones.
Without cell phones. We stopped at the Plainfield rest stop, and I used the payphone and tried to call somebody to see if I could find out anything, but we couldn't. So we came on home, dropped the kids off at Gary's mom and dad's, and headed on down there. I don't even remember there's so many things that just are gone. I don't remember if Gary went with me to the house. He either had the kids or went with me. But showed up at the house, and fortunately Dad showed up right after me. So that was a huge relief. And by then, all the fire trucks are gone, and the coroner's gone, and all that. So it was just us, and my grandma showed up, and we're just standing there looking at rubble. It was absolutely nothing left. The fire was intensely hot, and the walls of the house, the exterior walls, just sort of laid over. It was really weird.
Complete devastation.
Yeah. I kind of walked through that day and looked around. Well, I couldn't walk through. I'm looking from the sides, and there was something big, and it turned out to be something from the piano in the dining room. And at that point, that was the only thing that was even remotely recognized. Yeah.
So you go through the loss of your mom, and now the loss of the farming business, essentially, and now this house that held so many memories for you. What did all of this, again, tragedy, it I think either makes us run away from the Lord or makes us run to the Lord. And so where did you find yourself in that? And I think sometimes we feel this pull towards both. But what did that do to your faith? And was there ever a time where you just felt like throwing in the towel?
Yeah. So we found out that the fire was arson. And I'll not go into any of those details, but that does play a big part in, I was absolutely terrified then after that. So, and not only dealing with all of these losses and grief and everything, but now I'm terrified,
Yeah.
and Gary's working nights,
Yeah.
an hour one way away, and I've
at
got 3
home
little girls. So
yeah.
in my mind at night, I'm thinking, okay, now if the house catches on fire, how do I get these girls out of the house safely? So it was just, your mind just runs crazy with stuff. So a day or so later, after we'd gotten home and the fire had cooled off, I went over and was kind of wandering around, and there was nothing to look at. Nothing. It was just gone. And I'm just thinking, man, I feel like the rug's been pulled out from under me. It was just one blow after another in 11 months' time.
Yeah.
And all the things that were precious to me, not all the things. I still had a lot of blessings out there.
The people, but those material things that oftentimes we attach with the people that are close to us.
Yeah. It was all gone, and it just felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and I just landed hard on the ground and had nothing left. Because I'd just been plodding along and keeping my faith and taking care of the kids and just, one foot in front of the other. It wasn't easy. I was a wreck most of the time. But, so I'm standing there in the ashes there, and realize, I'm just angry and lost, and I don't think I was literally physically shaking my fists, but in my mind, in my heart, I was shaking my fist at God, and I said, where are you in all of this? Do you even know what's going on down here? Do you care? Do you even exist? I remember clearly, those are the things that didn't come out of my mouth, but they were in my heart. And just in an instant, when that came out of my mouth, it didn't come out of my mouth, but God spoke to my heart in an unmistakable way, and he said, yes, I know what's going on, and I'm here, and I care, and I love you, and you can trust me. And I was like, okay.
That was pretty undeniable.
Yeah. So I know we're going to run out of time for the important stuff.
No.
But so I started walking around just trying to process what I had just heard and what had just happened. And I saw this little ceramic piece that had survived the fire. That was the only thing. It had been in a drawer. It was kind of buried and caught my eye, and I pulled it out. It was a ceramic piece of a sculpture of Jesus. I didn't sculpt it, but I painted it because I did ceramics whenever I was in high school or a kid. My entire life, my grandmother was teaching us how to do those. So it was something I had stained and sealed and still have one in my house. And then I found this one, and the contrast, as you can see, are incredible.
I mean, the one that was in the fire, all of the paint, and it's all gone. I mean, it's stripped down to what it is, but it's in such great shape. I mean, there's a crack, but I imagine finding that was such a relief, or maybe brought that assurance.
It did, because it happened just right after I felt God speak to me, and there was just so much wrapped up into that it confirmed for me that, he's there and he knows what's going on.
We have just a couple more minutes, but you recently wrote a book just detailing your experience. And as I read it, it was the first time, I've been part of your family for 20 years, and it was the first time I'd actually read some of the details of what had happened. Why did you decide to write a book, and how did that help you process? I
decided in 1986 probably that one day I was going to write this, but it takes a lot of emotional energy to go back into something like that. And the girls were little. We really didn't talk about it. I joke that we didn't talk about Bruno because I love that song. So they grew up not really knowing what had happened, and I hate that. But I couldn't talk about it to them. And they kind of reached an age that, why bring it up now?
Yeah.
And then probably they were in high school. Heather was in junior high when we finally, I was going to talk on Sunday morning. And I thought, hey, I need to tell you guys some things.
Fill you all in.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that really did help me process. I wanted to write it for the girls just because I couldn't talk to them. I could talk to you, I could talk to anybody else for the most part, and I'd get choked up, but I just couldn't talk to them. And even just talking about how it affects them or might affect them is difficult. So finally, when I retired in 2018, God was like, now's the time. I'm walking this journey with you. You have to do this now. And it took me a year to do it, to write 35 pages. I thought it would be so much longer. But yeah, I wrote it for them. They were the first to read it besides Gary. And yeah, they had good comments for Mom. It made me, it helped.
Yeah.
And
I know for Amber, it made her just love and respect you even more. What would you say to a person who maybe is walking through their own fire right now, trial in life, and feeling like maybe giving up?
Yeah. Well, don't give up. Some of the stories, a Bible story that really connected with me. Are we okay?
Yeah.
Keep going. Okay. During this time was, and you and Carrie talked about this in your earlier podcast about Elijah on the mountaintop.
Yes.
But I'm after the mountaintop.
Yeah.
When he's ran away and he's under a tree, asking God to just take him. I'm done. I'm the only one here. And the angel comes to him and says, "Wake up.
Yeah.
Eat something."
What are you doing here?
Yeah. The journey is too much for you. And that was what stuck with me. I held on to that a lot.
Yeah.
The journey is too much for you.
And it is. If we try to get through it on our own, it is way too much.
Yeah.
But we have a Father who meets us in our pain and in our brokenness, and he carries that burden with us.
Definitely.
Yeah. Lynn, thanks for sharing your story, part of your story. I know we could share certainly a whole lot more, but I really just appreciate you being here with us today. And thank you, listener, for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to share it with a friend and hit that follow button so that you don't miss any of our upcoming interviews. I hope that Lynn's story will encourage you to go out and live your own faith story, even in the midst of the pain and the hardships, in a way that it not only changes your life, but you can be a spiritual influence in the lives of those around you.